JoAnn Romain was born on the 14th of May 1954 in Wayne County, Michigan, and was described as happy, nurturing, loving and caring. She was a woman who would do anything to help anyone. She had 3 children called David, Michelle and Kelly, together with her husband David, who she married in 1980, but both separate after 25 years of marriage, and she then moved in with her 2 daughters. She had been a devout Catholic and regularly attended church, sometimes going multiple times a week, and also attended that local church every single Sunday. This church overlooked Lake Sinclair, which is a lake that is part of the Great Lakes system, and it has a depth of only 11 feet. Always a happy and loving person, just over a month before her death, she told her daughters that the spare keys to her car had gone missing. JoAnn also started making comments about her cousins called Tim. Tim had been a police officer at that time. An argument had started after her parents had died and centered around their inheritance, causing a massive rift in their family, with some members of their family not speaking to each other. One day, JoAnn had been on the phone to Tim and her daughters had been in the same room, hearing raised voices, and heard JoAnn say to Tim, "Keep your nose out of everyone's business." After this phone conversation, JoAnn started to tell everyone that if anything happened to her, they need to look at Tim. JoAnn Romain attended church for prayer service on the evening of the 12th of January 2010. On her way to church, she stopped and filled her car up with petrol, then carried on her journey to her local church. She stayed in church until 7:20 p.m., when a witness saw her leave the church, and around a minute later another witness said he heard a car alarm go off for JoAnn's car, that was in the church car park. Back at home, her daughters arrived home at 9 p.m. after going out for dinner and realized their mother wasn't home, so they tried to call her but got no answer. Police arrived at their home at 9:24 p.m. and explained they had found their mom's car abandoned at the church car park. Her daughters then hurried to the church car park, where they found police officers and a helicopter flying over the lake in front of the church. It came out that a police officer had earlier found JoAnn's car and saw a set of footprints in the snow walking away from her car and towards the lake, but there were no footprints walking back to the car, so he decided to run the license plates. He then contacted Coast Guards at 9:30 p.m., who then began a search of the lake 8 minutes later. Police investigators dusted her car for fingerprints, but some have claimed they did this incorrectly. Also, DNA swabs were apparently never taken from her car. JoAnn remained missing until 70 days later, when on the 20th of March, her body was found by fishermen in Amherstburg in Ontario. Her body taken to the coroner for the province of Ontario so an autopsy could be performed. An autopsy performed 2 days later listed her cause of death as from dry drowning, which is a form of drowning where the water never reaches the lungs. Her manner of death was then listed as undetermined. She was then transported back to the United States for a second autopsy the next day at the Macomb County Medical Examiner's Office, who came to the same conclusion as the first autopsy. Her family asked for a third autopsy to be done, which took place at the University of Michigan 2 days later. They determined that her death was down to freshwater drowning and said that her manner of death was undetermined, but did note bruising on her upper left arm. Police ruled her death a suicide. From the start, most of her family and her daughters believed that JoAnn had been murdered and disputed police's theory that she committed suicide, due to some facts that have apparently been ignored by authorities. At the scene that night, JoAnn's handbag was found and the strap had a rip in it. She had always carried her handbag on her left shoulder, the same arm that the bruising was found on the third autopsy. That night, JoAnn had been wearing high heels when she attended the church, but the footprints in the snow walking from her car to the lakefront were actually boot prints and were in a larger shoe size than what JoAnn would wear. Also, it would have been harder for JoAnn to walk in high heels to the lake because of the obstacles you need to climb over and the concrete embankment in front of the lakefront. It has also been said that it would have been difficult for JoAnn to have drowned herself in that lake, as it was so shallow that even ships and boats going through that lake need to use a deep trench located in the middle of that lake to get through, otherwise the boats would sink as the water is too low to go on. A witness came forward saying they had seen a man that night wearing a scarf and running away from where the church was located. That same night, a police officer found a scarf on the road, and instead of keeping it in evidence, police donated the scarf to a charity shop. Most strangely though, if you remember, we mentioned before that the spare keys to JoAnn's car had gone missing just over a month before she disappeared, which she had mentioned to her daughters. The day after JoAnn went missing from the church car park, those same spare keys appeared at the police station. A police officer later testified that he was told to go get those spare keys, but he said he couldn't remember which police officer had instructed him to retrieve the keys, and testified that he couldn't remember the address he had been sent to get the keys from and couldn't describe the person at that address who handed the keys over to him. Finally, 6 days after JoAnn went missing, a witness came forward with what he claimed to have seen that night. This witness met with detectives and explained how he had been driving down the road where the church was located and spotted 2 cars that were parked at the lane closest to the lake of the church, one of the cars being a navy blue color, and saw 2 men wearing long coats standing there. He then saw a woman sitting on the wall there and said she looked like JoAnn Romain. This woman was sitting on the wall emotionless and slumped over. Police dismissed his claims and said his story was inconsistent. The witness was so certain with what he saw that night, and when he found out police were dismissing his story, he took his claims to the FBI and then went to the Michigan State Police to say what he saw that night. That witness saw a picture of Tim, JoAnn's cousin, and said he was 100% sure that Tim was one of the men he saw that night stood beside JoAnn. Tim came forward with an alibi for that night that he had been working at the Michigan State Narcotics Task Force between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. that night. When spoken to, none of the officers there that night had seen him but were in continuous contact with him throughout the night on their radios. The lieutenant there said it would have been improbably, although not impossible, for Tim to have left the building that night. When Tim's phone records were looked at, they found that 21 calls had been placed between 3:49 p.m. and 8:54 p.m. from the vicinity of where his job was located. When JoAnn's phone records were looked at, it was found that she had been contacting a security firm because she felt that she was being followed. A civil suit later took place, and during this, JoAnn's paralegal testified how JoAnn had told her that her cousin Tim had said, "If someone wants to get rid of you, they could do it and you would never be found." JoAnn had also gone to her paralegal with suspicions that she was being followed, and JoAnn told her paralegal she believed it was either Tim or someone following her on Tim's behalf. When confronted with these allegations, Tim denied all of this had happened, and when Tim was interviewed by Dateline Detroit for their documentary on this case, Tim said that he is actually the victim here of a witch hunt by JoAnn's daughters and their family. Tim claimed that the phone call he had with JoAnn where she told him to mind his business, that they were actually talking about an interaction JoAnn had with her brother Bill. Since then, police have kept their belief that her death was from a suicide, although many of her friends and family disagree and feel strongly that she was murdered. JoAnn's daughters have now created a petition asking for the FBI, Attorney General of Michigan, the Governor of Michigan, and the U.S. Department of Justice to start a new investigation into the death of JoAnn Romain, and although her case is still open, no progress has been made so far.